Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to this very important forum. Tonight, we have our Hamilton County sheriffs and Hamilton County prosecutors all present, eager to answer questions that you all have. So this evening is an amazing event. We have several partners that have partnered with the League of Women Voters of Cincinnati area to bring this event forward and present questions. Our partners this evening are the Junior League of Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Women's Political Caucus, the Matriarchs, the Women's City Club, Cincinnati's Organization, Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, the Epsilon Lambda Sigma Chapter, and Hype Programs. We want to thank our sponsors so much for gathering their members and friends and guests to witness this event. This evening, we are going to have a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated share the Pledge of Allegiance before we get started. So without further ado, I'm going to ask LaShonda Ewing to share the Pledge of Allegiance for tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Ms. LaShonda. So I'm going to introduce our candidates tonight. Tonight we have our Hamilton County Prosecutor, Mr. Joseph T. Deters, and we also have Fanon A. Rucker. You will notice the candidates on their names, they have the letter P for prosecutor, just so that you know who's speaking. And then we also have our Hamilton County Sheriffs, Bruce Hofbauer and Charmaine Mcguffey. So without further ado, we are going to have the candidates introduce themselves this evening, starting with Joseph T. Deters.
Okay, this is really weird for me, but I'm doing my best. Okay. So first of all, thank you for doing this. It's really, I think, helpful to the voters of the county. I've been the prosecutor in Hamilton County for over 20 years. And I've got to be telling you, this is the greatest honor of my life. My job is to deliver justice to victims of crime, to defendants, which may sound odd to people that a prosecutor has to deliver justice to defendants, and to the people of Hamilton County. Besides the fact that I have personally tried hundreds of felons and actually tried 5 serial killers, my experience is multifaceted. I've run administrative offices, big government offices, three large government offices. I was the clerk of courts where we had over 300 employees. I was the treasurer of the state of Ohio, where we had hundreds of employees, in the prosecutor's office, which has about 200 employees. My current job as prosecutor, we've been a leader in Ohio. And if you talk to people throughout the state, they'll tell you the prosecutor's office in Cincinnati is, maybe I'm prejudiced, but is the best office in the state. We have a philosophy in our office, and it's twofold. We want to identify violent offenders and get them off the streets of Cincinnati. But we also want to save the savable people. People make mistakes all the time. And in Hamilton County, we have over 23 diversion programs, which leads the state of Ohio by a long shot. I formed the first drug court in the state of Ohio.
30 seconds.
Yes, ma'am. And my theory on crime is when you have a violent offender, they gotta be gone. But if you can save the savable, we save the savable. It would be my honor to continue to be your prosecutor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we will have Hanan A. Rucker. You have 3 minutes to do a personal introduction.
Well, good evening, and thank you all so much for putting on this incredibly important forum. League of Women Voters, Sigma Gamma Rho, there's a long list, and it really is important for the voters and the citizens to be able to hear from those who are looking to be in positions that have such an incredible impact on our citizens and our county. Well, my name is Hanan Rucker. I was born and raised in Gary, Indiana. My father was a prosecutor. My mother was a social worker with the Department of Public Welfare. I grew up in a part of the city that we experienced some of the worst that life had to offer. We used to get our house broken into and had our lives threatened. I know what it's like to live in neighborhoods where you're afraid to come out of the house and afraid to go home. When I was in high school, my high school guidance counselor told me that I shouldn't waste my time going to college because based on my neighborhood where I was living at, I probably wouldn't be successful. Fortunately, I didn't listen to Sister Alfred, who was like 140 at the time, but that's another story for another day. I went to Hampton University to study computer science. Well, I soon realized that math and I weren't good friends, and so I changed my major to psychology. It was my junior year in college when, in the spring of that year, I made the decision to go to law school. See, there was this incident that happened in California where this guy didn't stop for the police and they ended up beating him pretty bad. His name was Rodney King. When the officers involved in that incident, who were correctly charged, they were acquitted and our country erupted in riots. And it was literally that incident, that flashbulb in our country's history that made me decide that I wanted to be a lawyer. So that summer I went home and I talked to my father, who at the time was on the Court of Appeals in Indiana. And I told him I wanted to go to law school. And my father told me that if I wanted to go to law school because I wanted to make a difference, because I think I can change the world, then by all means, I should pursue a law degree. And those words have stuck with me my entire career. I started as a prosecutor for the city, prosecuting on behalf of victims and individuals for the city of Cincinnati. I left that prosecutor's office and I joined the law firm where for 7 years I was a civil rights and employment discrimination and business litigator representing individuals in federal court and lawsuits, class actions, individual cases. And then I represented defendants and businesses in federal and state court and became the law director for a municipality. For almost 13 years, I was a judge here in Hamilton County, presiding over several 100,000 cases, writing more decisions than anyone on the bench. And all the time it was about justice. In the community, I've been a leader in community, charitable, and legal associations. Just last year, I retired from the bench where I joined the Cochran Law Firm where I continue to advocate on behalf of the people. But with a vast amount of experience and insight from both sides of the bench, I want to be your prosecutor. I want to be your full-time prosecutor dealing with full-time issues here in Hamilton County.
Stop.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rucker. Next, we're going to introduce our candidates for county sheriff. We're going to start with Bruce Hofbauer for a 3-minute introduction.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. This is really quite an honor, and it's kind of coming home week for me a little bit. I've worked with Joe, I've worked with Fanon, and I know Charmaine from many, many years ago. So I've been in the courtroom with Fanon and Joe and worked with Charmaine. So it's great to be with everybody here. So my name is Bruce Hofbauer, and I am candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. So let me give you a little bit of background of who I am and what I'm about. This journey to become the Hamilton County Sheriff is not something I thought about one day when I woke up. This has been part of my DNA and excuse me, who I have been my whole life. I retired in March from the Cincinnati Police Department after 34 years of service. I raised through the ranks, through competitive examination to the rank of lieutenant. I commanded almost every department inside the department. And this all comes from, again, my DNA. My father, Ray Hofbauer, is a retired colonel from the sheriff's office. After 52 years, he worked there and became a colonel. some of the biggest role models in my life. My mom, who's passed away, worked with Joe in the prosecutor's office, and I'm sure Fanon remembers my mom working in the prosecutor's office as secretary for over 30 years. My wife, Patty, is a retired Cincinnati police officer. My daughter, Katie, is currently a Cincinnati police officer. And my son, Jake, is a Cincinnati firefighter. So this just isn't something that I do, it's who I am. And as Joe mentioned, as he opened up, experience counts, experience counts, experience counts. I have 34 years, and prior to being a Cincinnati police officer, Charmaine will remember that I started with her at the old workhouse down in Camp Washington. And I worked in the workhouse for a year and a half before I became a Cincinnati police officer. So my experience goes back 35 years. And 34 of those years have been out in the community, building bridges, working with folks, understanding what's going on. I worked in neighborhoods like Fanon mentioned, where he grew up, where I could really make a difference. When we have a medical problem, we want the best physician or surgeon we can have to make us better. Hamilton County needs a good, strong sheriff. They need somebody who is clear, concise, has the mission of the agency in mind, not themselves, and someone who can go into that agency and make it better. The problems that are there did not happen
30
overnight.
seconds.
They happened over time. I guarantee you that the citizens of Cincinnati and Hamilton County trusted me to be a lieutenant in management for 34 years. And I didn't let them down. And I guarantee you that when I'm elected sheriff, I will not let down the residents of Hamilton County, Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'm looking forward to being your next sheriff of Hamilton County.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hofbauer. Next, we will have Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this great forum and all of the co-sponsors. And I tell you, I appreciate being here so much. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in Price Hill. I'm a lifelong Hamilton County resident. I had a single mom and 2 sisters. And, you know, when I decided at 14 that I wanted to be a police officer, I was told, you know, women can't be police officers. And they couldn't. At that time, they could not be police officers. In fact, I continued on that career path, knowing that that is exactly what I was going to accomplish. Didn't know how, because the law said you couldn't be at that time. But I went to UC. I earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And when I graduated, women had stepped up to the plate and forced a change in that unfair rule and law, and women could be police officers. I joined the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. I spent 33 years in that sheriff's office, and I worked nearly every job in the sheriff's office. I rose through the ranks, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then major, the highest ranking woman in the history of the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department. And in that role, I was the commander of 500 uniformed staff, 100 support staff, and most importantly, 1,400 prisoners. I was in control of a $36 million budget, and I was the highest ranking woman to ever hold that office in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. I also served in various other roles during my career. I was a corrections training academy commander for many, many years. I was the commander of the honor guard for the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. I was a lead hostage negotiator for our emergency response team, which is our SWAT team going out for hostages, barricaded individuals, etc. I'm an accomplished self-defense instructor. I've taught all over the state of Ohio. I was at one time one of only 8 instructor trainers in the state of Ohio who were certified to certify police instructors. I also am a certified police officer, obviously. I have over 100 commendations in my file, and that is a testament to the fact that I have enjoyed every day I've ever served in uniform. And I'm going to put that uniform back on as your sheriff of Hamilton County. And I do remember Bruce, I was his supervisor when he worked down at the jail. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mcguffey. So we are going to open this evening with our first long answer question. And just for the simplicity, we're going to go in the same order that we just went, and probably will keep that order throughout the evening. Our major question and thesis, if you will, for this event is, what are your ideas about reforming the criminal justice system to create a process that is more equitable? And we're asking that question to both the sheriff and the prosecutor candidates. You have 5 minutes to respond to this question. We're going to start with Joseph Deters.
Thank you. Thanks. You know, I mentioned in my opening statement that we fight for justice every day. My assistants know that. They know that we strive for that every day, whether it's in the grand jury or in courts. And one of the things that I really have to tell people when I go out in public and talk about is that we aren't there just to win cases. We are there to deliver justice to the people of the county, not just trying to win a case or anything like that. That's not what we do. And that's what we strive to do every single day. That's why I was a great supporter when Judge Dieter came to me and said, Joe, there is a new program to help people who are drug addicted. And Deidre Hare went down to Miami, Florida, which was the absolute first drug court in the country. She asked me to come down. I saw what they did. I saw how they saved lives. And that was really important to me. And it changed my life to a great degree. And sometimes people think, oh, Joe's just a hard guy. He's, too tough and things like that. But the reality is we strive all the time to save savable people. We try to do that. And because of that, as I said earlier, we have 23 diversion programs, whether it's drug court, we have courts for veterans, we have courts for prostitutes, we got all kinds of things trying to get them out of the system and make it so that they can be savable. But by the same token, there are people that commit such horrendous crimes, you cannot save them. They're unsavable. And unfortunately, we have to deal with these all the time. I know Charmaine and Bruce and Fanon know this to be the case. I mean, it just, sometimes you deal with somebody like an Anthony Kirkland who kills 5 girls, 2 under the age of 13. You've got to be able to deliver justice to these victims' families. And that's what we try to do. And we're going to continue to do it. And I'm glad you guys are doing this today, because people don't realize the role of the prosecutor. The role of the prosecutor is not just to lock people up. It's not. It's to save people many, many times over than just locking people up. And that's what we're trying to do. And I'll continue to do it if I have the honor to be prosecutor again.
Thank you so much for your response. I'm going to go to Fanon Rucker for the same question. You need the question again?
Please.
Okay, so the question is, what are your ideas about reforming the criminal justice system to create a process that is more equitable?
Well, that's an important question. There was an AP poll last week that said 95% of the population believes that our justice system needs some changes. That's from major changes to complete overhaul. 5% said it's fine the way it is. 95%. What we know is over the past couple of months, we've seen literally hundreds of thousands of people across the country in peaceful marches. Of course, some have turned violent, but in peaceful marches across our world, saying that there's a change that's necessary to how we conduct ourselves, particularly in our justice system. You know, before I talk about our 6 issues, Joe mentioned about Anthony Kirkland. I do remember that case. I was the judge that signed the warrants for him to be searched and locked up. And I was the one that actually set bond on him when he stood in front of the court for the first time. I do remember that. There were 6 issues that, you know, there's a lot, but there are 6 when asking what changes to make the process more equitable. And I'll give a little description of each and try to do this within 4.5 minutes. First of all, bail reform. Now, I know that folks, that's kind of a flashpoint to people's excitement, but bail reform, and the perfect example of bail reform is New Jersey. It was a bipartisan process that reduced the jail population and also ensured that people actually returned to have their cases heard, which is the primary purpose of bail. This is an issue that Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives all agree with. In fact, our Chief Justice issued a statement on July 4th, where she reiterated the fact that people should not be sitting in jail because they cannot afford to get out. As prosecutor, I'll advocate to eliminate cash bail for nonviolent offenses. A conviction integrity unit. We know that across our country, prosecutors' offices for the past 20+ years have been setting up conviction integrity units to review legitimate claims of exoneration by individuals who have been sitting in jail for sometimes generation, 20, 30, 40 years for crimes that they absolutely did not commit. Our office will have a conviction integrity unit to review those legitimate claims of exoneration because it helps build trust in a system. And we can't have justice if individuals and systems don't work with the communities, and you can't work together if there's no trust. I'll be a bridge builder. Also, violent crime in our county, particularly in our city, has risen exponentially this year. There have been more women killed in 2020, just by May, than there were in the entirety of 2019. I have, through leadership in several organizations as a judge, but also in the community, worked to bridge relationships. And I'll do that with federal, state, law enforcement, and the community to ensure that we're all working together to support victims before they become victims. And also to make sure that those who are causing harm and threatening harm in our communities are ousted, not just by law enforcement, but with the assistance of the communities that they're committing their crimes in. Remember, I've lived in those communities and I know that no one wants to live like that. Reentry court, 95% of people who go to prison come back. And we want them to return as active, engaged, productive citizens ready to contribute to the community they once took away from. Knowing that the support that individuals have when they come out is the question of success. Again, I'll pull all those partners together to make sure that there's the force of a robe and a gavel behind people returning to court to ensure their success and reacclimation into a society that is not often ready to bring them back home, and that they have stumbling blocks as they return. Diversity. You know, again, this is an issue that conservatives and liberals all agree on by virtue of the fact that our private corporations and our public agencies recognize that diversity is an important issue in our society and has been for 50 years. It's amazing to me, and people are always surprised when I say that the county prosecutor's office has not hired an African-American man since 1999. 1999, 21 years of an office of 200+ employees. Our office will have deliberate efforts to engage not only the community to ensure it's safe, but to ensure that it's diverse and reflects the diversity ideologically and by race of the community that's impacted by its policies. And also, we've heard a lot about police reforms. The prosecutor's office can be a strong advocate in supporting or opposing efforts to build relationships between the police and the community. Governor DeWine and Governor Kasich, when he was in office, and nationally, Republicans and Democrats are making strides in helping to reform the police departments to build trust and accountability and to help make sure that people feel safe when they're engaged in their relationships with law enforcement. I agree with many of those, like having an independent body actually review death and serious bodily injury in police custody. And I'll advocate for those when I'm a prosecutor.
Thank you. Stop.
Thank you so much for your response. Now we're going to move to our sheriff candidates. We're going to start with Bruce Hofbauer. Bruce, would you like to hear the question again? Okay.
Yes, please.
The question again is, what are your ideas about reforming the criminal justice system to create a process that is equitable?
So let me start out by saying I heard what Joe said and I heard what Fanon said, and I hope everyone heard that. What amazing programs are already taking place. what I saw, we all saw weeks ago with that terrible incident in Minneapolis. As terrible as that was to watch, law enforcement, the prosecutor's office had to see that. The public had to see that. And what I didn't like was I felt like Cincinnati, Hamilton County was getting painted with a broad brush. A lot of the programs that Cincinnati and Hamilton County have been engaged in for some time have been going on here in Cincinnati, great programs. Other places around the country have fallen woefully behind. Even Mayor Cranley said that Cincinnati, Hamilton County were models for the country as a whole. And the other agencies should look to Cincinnati, Hamilton County for what we've done here. There is always room for improvement. Are we perfect in what we do? Absolutely not. There is always room for improvement. But I think that Cincinnati, Hamilton County has been on the path to making criminal justice reform something more than just a term. The engagement in the community. I can tell you that when I worked the streets for 34 years on the street in the community, that was something that I did to work and build bridges with neighborhoods, with community councils, with individuals. The things that we do every day in our community that don't get seen by the public, we need to bring that out more. We need to show the community what we're doing. We need to keep going, and we need to say this. In 2001, we had the riots here in Cincinnati, and there's been a term said, well, there's been a table set. There was a table set in 2001 to bring the community in to talk about things like criminal justice reform, how things were going into the jail, the collaborative agreement. I was a part of all that since 2001. I worked with individuals in the community, and we got to build on that. We have things and programs in the justice system now, like drug court. Joe mentioned drug court. The recovery pods, which I know happened in the jail, and Sheriff Neal was instrumental in making sure that happened in the Justice Center. The Hamilton County Heroin Task Force, that's something that touches every agency here in Hamilton County. And the Sheriff's Office and the City of Cincinnati, the police chief, and all agencies should be working with the judges, the prosecutors, the attorneys, social services to see what's needed once an individual gets out of the Justice Center. In my job, when I was on the street, like Joe said, I arrested a lot of people. I was around when Kirkland committed those heinous crimes. I was there when he was arrested. I saw the viciousness in that man's eyes. He deserved to go to prison. There are some people who, when they do go to jail, they need to have that pathway to get back out and be a productive citizen. So we can't lock somebody up and throw away the key. We have to find that pathway. I give credit where credit is due. Some of the programs in the Justice Center have been good, but those were absolutely overseen by Jim Neal, and he dictated that down to people in the jail, and those can only be improved on. And so when I'm sheriff, I will simply improve on those and make them better. Again, the problems didn't happen overnight, and they're not going to go away overnight. So I think continuous improvement is the key. We do that in everything we do. So please don't paint Cincinnati, Hamilton County with the broad brush that we are not doing anything. It's going to take a long time to get things where we really want them, but I think we here are on the right path. I just have to say that Charmaine Mcguffey was never my supervisor. I'm sorry, Charmaine, I think you lost track of the time, but you were never my supervisor. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response. Lastly, we're going to have Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Sheriff, Hamilton County Sheriff, answer the question, what are your ideas about reforming the criminal justice system to create a process that is equitable? You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. The Sheriff's Office is multifaceted. The Sheriff's Office is set up so that we touch literally every facet of the Hamilton County justice system and the criminal justice system as a whole. When I took over as major in 2013, our jail was rated the worst jail in the state of Ohio, the worst. We are the third largest jail in the state of Ohio. In just 3 years under my leadership, with my great staff, we brought that jail up to the highest ranking jail in the state of Ohio. In that time, I created the heroin recovery pod for the women. I created the men's veterans pod for the men, the exit pod for men who are getting out of jail so that they can understand how to get their driver's license back, how to pay their child support and so forth, and rebuild their lives. I will continue those reforms, and I appreciate that Bruce gave the accolades of those reforms, but didn't understand that I'm the person that actually created them and did all of the community and legwork to form those reforms and support them inside that incarcerated facility, along with a lot of other things. I'm also going to create a liaison unit that is going to enhance and provide services for people who want to know what's going on in our jail and help people who are incarcerated so that they can get out of jail and become productive citizens. I'm going to start a culture and create a culture of accountability and transparency. And the way I'm going to do that is create a citizens review board so that we can bring citizens from our community to the table to help us with policy and procedure. And I tell you, those citizens will be chosen and they will come to our board as volunteers, and we will be the first sheriff's department in the state of Ohio to ever do that voluntarily, because we will be transparent. I will empower the staff to report any excessive use of forces, any misdeeds that go on, so that they can feel free to do that without being ridiculed for it. I'm going to bring diversity to that command staff, which at the moment, and when I was there, was all white men. And I'm also going to introduce a human resource department. Most importantly, I'm going to ensure that the sheriff's office is on patrol in the jail, in the courthouse, and serving and protecting everyone equally. And that we keep in mind, criminal justice reform is not just a buzzword, as I've heard my opponents say. It's real, it's there. I know how to work it. I've been doing it. And I will say this, in a paramilitary organization, when you are a sergeant, you outrank a line staff probationary officer. So I was Bruce Hofbauer's supervisor. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much for your response, Charmaine Mcguffey. We are going to have a segment which is a short answer question. Each of these questions, you will have 3 minutes. There will be 2 different questions. I'm going to switch it up a little bit and start with our sheriff, since they want to chat this evening. With our first short answer question, Bruce, I'm coming back to you for this one. So listen up, you have 3 minutes. The question is from one of our co-sponsor groups, the Matriarchs. They asked, can you tell us about a time in your career where you made the difficult decision to speak out against practices you considered to be wrong? Share with us how you stand up for what you believe in, and how has this influenced your run for office? And we're going to start with Bruce Hofbauer, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff.
Thank you. I can go back to, and again, my experience is both in corrections and on the street for 34 years. So very early, an incident that comes to mind is back almost at the beginning of my career, being a new police officer, seeing and trying to learn your way and be accepted into the police life and how things are done. There was an incident in the West End where there was a police chase of a car, and a very veteran senior officer was involved in the chase. To make a long story kind of short, the individual was captured by the officer, and there was a struggle on the ground. And when the officer was on the ground struggling with this individual, there was some force that was used that did not appear to be appropriate. And as a new officer, I saw this and I didn't really know what to do. But when I was approached by a supervisor who asked me what happened, I felt that the only thing I could do and say was exactly what I saw. And I repeated, and I gave my statement to the supervisor of exactly what I saw. And the veteran senior officer was disciplined for what had occurred. So excessive use of force all the way back 30 plus years ago is something that I didn't tolerate, I never was a part of, and I wouldn't tolerate today. When someone talks about, I'm gonna have zero tolerance for excessive use of force, my question would be, well, when did we ever tolerate excessive use of force? So when I go back to being a brand new police officer and seeing something that I wasn't sure how I would handle it, I did the right thing and I answered the right questions. And I've slept very well over the past 34 years knowing that I did the right thing. The officer was disciplined for his behavior. And I think that gave me a lot of credibility within the organization. with both newer and older officers. They saw that this new young officer saw something that was inappropriate. When I was asked by a supervisor, I explained what happened, and it was handled appropriately. And I've used that incident, that type of incident, my entire career. So anytime I saw something wrong, I called it out wrong. If it is wrong, we as law enforcement professionals have to say, look, this is wrong. Don't make it something that it's not. Own up to it. Take responsibility for your actions and what you did. Take the discipline if that's what's going to occur, and move on in your career. Don't make excuses. Don't blame things on everyone else. Own up for the mistakes that you've made that may have cost you your job or may have cost you a promotion, and be a good police officer for the remaining of your career.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Can you please answer the question? Do you need me to read it one more time for you?
Would you please? That would be great.
Absolutely. The question is, can you tell us about a time in your career where you made the difficult decision to speak out against practices you considered to be wrong? Share with us how you stand up for what you believe in and how this has influenced your run for office.
Thank you very much for that. So my opponent said that he didn't know a time when there was never a tolerance for excessive use of force. I can tell you a time, 2015, 2016 in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. As the major in that time period in the Sheriff's Office, I spoke out against excessive use of force on different occasions. I was very insistent about it. I was told to stand down. I was told to stay in my lane. I was told to go with the flow. I did none of those things. I continued to point out excessive use of force. I continued to speak out against what was wrongful treatment of female prisoners by male officers, wrongful treatment of female officers by male officers. And for those actions, what I received was I was fired by the sheriff. I was fired by Jim Neal because I didn't stay in my lane, because I continued to speak out about wrongful behavior, use of forces that were wrong, excessive use of forces, which quite frankly put prisoners in the hospital. And as well, 10 years ago, when I was leaving a gay bar, we were accosted and targeted by an officer for absolutely zero reason, no reason whatsoever. I called out that officer's behavior, and for that, Sheriff Simon Lease disciplined me because I was in a gay bar. That officer wrote citations because he didn't like the fact that I told him, you can't target a gay bar. That is not appropriate behavior. You shouldn't be doing that. Those citations were summarily dismissed and expunged because in the end, that officer and those departments knew they did the wrong thing. I'll continue to call it out for my entire career, and I will have a zero tolerance for excessive use of force. And I do have personal knowledge of when it's happened, and I mean it's happened very recently, and we just saw it on TV with George Floyd. Protesters, people that are peaceful and take to the streets to voice their displeasure with that and the fact that it's wrong. I applaud you all. You're changing the system, and that is exactly why I need to be the next sheriff of Hamilton County. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. I'm going to move another question to our Hamilton County Prosecutor candidates. And I'm going to start with Mr. Fanon Rucker, if you don't mind. The question, which came from the Cincinnati Women's City Club, as well as Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, is how will you support bail reform? And what is your position on eliminating cash bail?
I want to say I really wanted to answer that last question.
I'm going to allow you to answer that other question in the short answer questions, but I wanted to ask this as a long answer question to our prosecutors.
Understand.
I'll come back to that one.
No, I'm just joking. Seriously, as I said in my explanation about systemic reform, one of the things that has universally been acknowledged, again, by liberals and conservatives alike, is that no one should be forced to sit in jail because they can't afford to bond their ways out. Rule 46 is the bail statute in our state, and it outlines, number one, the considerations for bail. And those considerations include, violence to themselves, violence to the community. There's a number of different factors that as a judge every single day and every single week, hundreds of thousands of times I had to consider. But what we also know is the stories like Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old young man in New York who, because his family cannot afford a $3,000 bail, he sat in jail for over 2 years, most of that time in solitary confinement. And the enormity of that experience caused him to commit suicide. And it highlighted the need for us to change the way that we handle cases of people who are accused of crimes that have not yet been convicted. How will I handle? In different places, they've made these changes to the system and eliminated cash bail and actually made it illegal. Some of our judges in the state have recognized that our bail system is unconstitutional because of when we have a schedule, it doesn't take into individual consideration of the person who's being charged and their resources, as we as judges are supposed to do. So I, as the prosecutor, will advocate for the same thing that they did in New Jersey, and that is to eliminate cash bail for all nonviolent offenses and for those felonies, again, nonviolent and low-level felonies. What we saw in New Jersey, again, was a bipartisan effort to work together, because that's how we achieve justice, to ensure that both sides could agree and that the maximum benefit would be created. And that's exactly what's happened. Check the statistics. They lowered their jail population, and there is evidence-based articles. There are evidence-based articles which show that there is no statistical difference between ordering someone to pay a specific amount of money to ensure they come back to court and people coming back on their own word. But we have to take in consideration the interest of victims in cases, like the individual I represent who was kicked in the head by the sheriff. And also we have to take in consideration the needs of the community and to ensure that they're safe when we're assessing bond. So that's how I will advocate very strongly for the elimination of cash bail, so that we're not having people languishing in jail while their cases are pending, because we know that impacts their jobs and their families. And mentally, it also has an impact on the communities that don't have resources to get out of jail.
Thank you. And
Thank you so much, Mr. Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor. Next, we will have Mr. Joe Deters answer the question, how would you support bail reform, and what is your position on eliminating cash bail?
Okay, so first of all, Fanon and I get along very well, and I would invite him to come to my office and meet the African Americans who we've hired since 1999. He's been saying this, and it's just ridiculous. He's welcome to come, have coffee with me, walk through the office, and see that is just absolutely false. It is not true in the least. I, along with Fanon, want to just make one quick comment about your last question to the sheriff's candidates, and that is this. I don't know if people recognize how much heat me and my office got for prosecuting Ray Tenzing for killing Sam DuBose and what he did, what he murdered Sam DuBose. The police were mad at me. The FOP issued they didn't agree with anything I did, but we charged him with murder, and I did it because it was the right thing to do. As prosecutor, there's days that you got to make a decision, what's right and what's wrong. And that was just the wrong thing to do. As to cash bail, just read the New York newspapers of what has happened in New York City since they eliminated cash bail. It is a mess what's happened. People are getting out of jail before the police even process the papers that they got to do. And it has become a hotbed of crime again, something that Giuliani took care of long ago. Now it's back. And look, judges set the bond. Fanon set bonds. The prosecutors don't set bonds. The Judges set the bonds. And if you want to have reform, if Fanon thought that bonds were being set too high, he could have called that in joint session or said something to me or somebody and stopped it if that was unfair. And I never got a phone call. I never heard a word about it. But it
30
is a
seconds.
problem. It is a problem. And when you have people, they had a press conference about this exact issue. I said, tell me 10 people in jail that right now should not be in jail. Tell me who they are. Give me their names. I've never heard a response, ever.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Joe Deters. Joe Deters, current Hamilton County Prosecutor. Forgive me. So the next question I actually left in the chat for you all to see, but I'll ask it out loud. We're going to start with Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. The question is, what is your opinion about defunding the police? Meaning shifting resources to fund more affordable housing, mental health services, community services, etc., and focus more on crime prevention. You have everyone has 3 minutes to answer this question.
I appreciate that. And it is a great question because particularly now in these days of reform and what we want to achieve in this reform initiative, it is about taking your funding and what I say is strengthening the police, strengthening them because you do bring in social services, because you do bring in mental health professionals, because they can partner with agencies who know these people that they interact with, so that when they respond, and police really, about 4% of their response rate is to the very, very violent issues going on. A lot of the responses with police officers are social ills. There are people who are struggling in life. They have mental illness. They don't know how to maintain in society. They're struggling with things. They're not healthy. They're addicted. Those are people who can benefit from a professional online staff who comes from an agency that knows how to funnel those people, how to help them, how to empower them to move along and not be incarcerated. It will help police officers when they arrive, when they have a mental health professional standing there with them, side by side, working out some of these issues that quite frankly don't need to be incarceration or escalate into shooting deaths, okay? We need people who are going to be on that line with the officers. We need to spend our money wisely in that regard. Of course, we support the officers. Police officers are necessary. We have to have them. Somebody goes in to rob a bank, you need a police officer. Somebody goes into a mall and doesn't care who they're going to shoot, we need police officers. But the other thing we need to do is realize that police officers need some help and assistance and support. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to buy a tank. I'm going to bring on some professionals, and we're going to count our equity in policing in professionals and people who want to help people and build those bridges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Next, we will have Bruce Hofbauer, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff, answer the question about defunding the police.
Well, this is an important moment in our national conversation, this defunding the police. I have to start out by saying, after 34 years as a police officer and seeing what I saw on the street, just not in a facility of a corrections facility, is that defunding the police is absolutely unreasonable. You cannot say that you are for defunding the police and also say you are for the reform. You can't cut the baby in half on this. You can't do that. You have to invest in the reform. Governor DeWine, I guess 2 weeks ago, put out like 8 points about his ideas about reform for police officers and agencies all throughout the state. And I agree with what the governor said to do. But what we can't do is say, well, we'll defund them some and put the money elsewhere. When you take that money away from law enforcement and you go put it, too much of it in these other services, now when there is that bank robbery, when there is that problem, the police aren't going to get there. It's going to be late. You have to invest in the reform, which is training, equipment, things like de-escalation training, which we do and we need to do more of it. Implicit bias training, which I implemented when I was the commander of the police academy for the city of Cincinnati. Implicit bias, and we built on that and built on that. We have the body-worn cameras. We have the in-car cameras. We have the Citizens Complaint Authority, which has now just been enhanced, I know, in Cincinnati. The transparency issue that has been lacking in some agencies, that can be built. The training, the equipment, qualified applicants to be police officers. So if we take money away from all of those things to defund, so we can have a social worker go to a family trouble, or maybe we can have a social worker go to an incident like we had out on I-275 with the individual who had the semi-tractor trailer and was threatening to kill police officers and citizens. If the police don't have the proper equipment, the proper training, the proper personnel, what happens in that incident? That was a textbook incident of why we need to invest in the reform. So get away from this making everybody happy and saying, well, we can defund, but we can reform. You have to invest in the reform. Defunding the police is absolutely insane. I am a
30
law
seconds.
person. There are great programs out there that we can enhance our social services and work with people who need help and need pathways to get back in society. But it starts with the police officer on the street. And when you call, you deserve a police officer to come to your house or come help you immediately. You should not wait, and you don't deserve a social worker. I've been in those runs where the social worker would have been there and they looked at the police officer and said, you got to take this person to jail. That was
Thank you.
implemented in Cincinnati, and I was a part of that.
Thank you so much for your response, Mr. Bruce Hofbauer, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Next, we will have Joe Deters, Hamilton County Prosecutor, answer the question about defunding the police.
Well, I agree with Bruce. I mean, the way you avoid situations like the Floyd case and the Tenzing case here locally is, number one, you need to have the resources to recruit the right people to be police officers. You have to give them the training and equipment to be police officers. You have to give them continued education and how to, as Bruce talked about, de-escalate issues. I think CPD during these protests, which are fun. And by the way, I have and would defend anybody's right to protest peacefully in the streets of Cincinnati. I have no problem with that at all. But when you start throwing bricks through police officers' cars, bashing out front windows of storefronts, these people that are trying to make a living, it's just wrong. And as long as I'm prosecutor, people that violently riot are going to be going to prison. I'm telling you right now. But nonetheless, defunding the police sounds really cute. It doesn't work. They've got to be able to recruit the right people to be cops. And they have to be able to train them and give them the equipment to do that job. It's the hardest job I can even imagine. My job's nothing compared to a cop's job. And I hope that smarter heads, clearer heads prevail in this fashion. Because if you don't have a viable, effective police force, you have chaos. Look at Portland. Look at Seattle. It is a disaster what's going on there. And, you know, that's not the city I grew up in. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. Grew up here in Cincinnati. I love this city. We indicted, I think, 14 rioters a couple weeks ago. And I am so disgusted by what they did to our city. A third of them weren't even from
30
Cincinnati.
seconds.
And I hope that people get that. They stand between us and chaos. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joe Deters, Hamilton County Prosecutor. Next, we will have Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor, answer the question about the defunding of the police. Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I
There we
think-
go. All right. Am I here? Goodness. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. It seems that my computer is freezing. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Sorry about that. The quick answer to the question is no, I'm not in favor of defunding the police, particularly in our community where, as I indicated previously, we've had this significant increase in violent crimes and murders. The solution is not to take money away, have the responsibility of investigation and enforcement. Now, I leave it to police professionals and administrators to decide how those funds can best be allocated. But I will say that I do believe that there is some value in repositioning funds for enforcement relative to violent crime, supporting neighborhoods and victims versus the smaller, less serious issues that we also have law enforcement resources geared towards. So, but again, that's an administrative piece. But ultimately, I don't believe, as others have said, in the defunding or even disbanding of our police departments. I agree. Police have one of the toughest jobs out here. And what we do know is that they have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession. And what I'm in favor of is yes, being more discerning on the front end when we bring officers in, as I believe that our process is. And I was part of creating that process back after we had our riots in 2001. I was selected to help bring equity to our court system and also to police procedures. But what we also need is some process that they're being monitored and checked along the way as those tensions are rising, as they're having issues at home. We do have, employment assistance programs available, but let's make it so that it's automatic, that they kind of get monitored in that process. So no, I don't believe in defunding, and I do believe that what we can do is reallocate resources so we're focused more on violent crimes than we are on minor offenses that people end up getting bottled up in court for in high bonds.
Thank you so much for your response, Mr. Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor. Our next segment is a short answer question segment where each candidate will be given 1 minute to answer the question, and the opposing candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the question. We're going to be starting with our sheriff candidates, starting with Ms. Charmaine Mcguffey. And the question actually comes from one of our partner organizations, the Cincinnati Association. Their question is as follows, a little long. Over the past few years, the Cincinnati organization has focused on addressing issues of poverty in greater Cincinnati. Almost 1 in 5 people residing in Hamilton County lives in poverty, a number exceeding the national average. In the city of Cincinnati, this number is a staggering 27%. People who entered the criminal justice system are overwhelmingly poor. Recent research indicates that if not for the rise of incarceration, the number of people in poverty would fall by as much as 20%. The question is, what can law enforcement in Hamilton County do to affect change in the communities they serve so that low-income individuals will have a more positive interaction with the justice system. The question is to Ms. Charmaine Mcguffey to start. 1 minute, please.
Thank you. We do know that when people are incarcerated, they fall further into poverty. The average is about 7 days when someone's incarcerated before they can ever get to an actual judge that can do something for them, either create a bond that they can be released on or start with some other kind of remedy to get them out of jail and move them along. In those 7 days, people can lose jobs. We sever ties with their family, their children. They lose money because it's expensive to navigate the system. Sometimes people don't even know where they're at when they're getting mental health help because nobody tells the mental health agency, this person just got arrested and now they're gone for 7 days. We need to do more to keep people out of jail in the first place because that actually makes poverty worse and it does drive people further into desperation and poor circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Charmaine Mcguffey. We'll allow 1 minute response from Bruce Hofbauer.
Thanks. So this goes back to our point earlier. It's about training. It's about investing in the reforms. As Joe said, investing in hiring and recruiting the best police officers that we can find, and then giving them the proper training. As I said before, things like teaching these officers not just to put handcuffs on somebody, but how to de-escalate problems, how to recognize your biases and work through those, how to know that everything you do is on camera so that it is now shown to the community. You know, this poverty thing is horrible. My mom came from 11 kids, and guess what? None of those kids were involved in crime. You cannot always say poverty is an excuse to be a criminal. There is a connection there sometimes, but again, like I said before, no broad brush. Poverty is not an excuse for being criminal or criminal activity, and we need to work with the officers on the street with the proper training to talk to the individuals on the street like they're human beings and not treat them like they're a number. And then we will keep them from going into jail. The recidivism will go down.
Thank you so much for your response. Our next question will be posed to the prosecutor candidates. We are going to start this question with Mr. Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office. What will you do to move cases through the system faster? You have 1 minute to respond to this question, Mr. Rucker. Make sure you got to unmute.
You would think this is my first time doing all this stuff. With the COVID-19 pandemic in the past 4 months, you know, there are so many cases that have gotten bottlenecked. So I'm not sure if this question is specifically about as a result of the bottleneck or generally to help cases move along more quickly. But what you do is you set an example and you require the prosecutors, you require the defense attorneys, and you ask the judges to ensure that folks are prepared. That's one thing my father always taught me as a judge, to always be prepared, as a lawyer to always be prepared. And so that's what I would have my folks who work under me do. And we'd encourage the defense bar as well as the judges to kind of make sure that people are receiving the justice that they require, but also that they're also cases moving along quickly.
Thank you so much, Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor. We'll now have Joe Deters, current Hamilton County Prosecutor, answer the question, what will you do to move cases through the system more quickly?
Well, Fanon's correct. And we've been doing this since this pandemic hit. We are actually running grand juries. We now are able to seat grand juries, separate them. We work with the judges. I probably talk to the presiding judge 3 times a week right now to move these cases along. And actually work with the public defender's office. If we can work out some kind of plea to loosen up the system, we do that right now. And thus far, our backlog is not that bad, considering that we've been shut down for 4.5 months. And we're going to continue to do it.
All right, thank you so much. That was Joe Deters, our current Hamilton County Prosecutor. Our next question, which will be posed to our Hamilton County Sheriff candidates, comes from Facebook. The question is, what would you do to reduce crime and require less police? And we're going to start with Bruce Hofbauer for a 1-minute answer to that question.
Reduce crime, and what was the other part of it?
How would you reduce crime and require less police?
I don't know if you can really have less police. Reducing crime is making sure that the citizens of Hamilton County and Cincinnati see those officers out on the street. High visibility, making sure that they are comfortable, the citizens, knowing that the police are there. I think if you keep the police on the street and visible, and you invest in this reform that I keep talking about, and the police officers are present, the criminal element will realize that opportunity is not there. They either go somewhere else or they change their mind. So you have to have that police visibility, the term omnipresence from years ago. But believe it or not, crimes aren't usually committed when the police car drives down the street or the criminal element knows that the police will come by. So hopefully, with a lot of police officers being present and being visible, that in and of itself will reduce crime while not getting rid of any more police officers out on the street.
All right. Thank you so much for that response. We're going to go to Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. The question is, how will you reduce crime and require less police?
The way that we address a crime issue is we look at the totality of the situation. There are many different arms and factors that create crime. And the first thing we need to do is start paying attention to our youth. And we start by addressing any of the housing problems, the poverty, the fact that some of those kids don't even have a meal to go to, their parents aren't there, et cetera. Then we also address housing. We address the economic issues that can drive people to crime. We address the issues surrounding addiction that can drive people to crime. And we don't get rid of police officers. No, certainly not. We have the police officers help us with this. Police officers are absolutely, they should be visible and they should have community engagement. They're not just there to be omnipresent, like they're going to sit there and wait for you to do something wrong. They have to help you. They have to talk to you. They have to engage with you. That's community policing, and that's how we reduce crime.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That was Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Next, we will go back to our prosecutors, and we will start this question with Mr. Joe Deters. It's a question that we did before for our sheriff, so we're going to come back and do it for you all. It is, can you tell us about a time in your career where you made the difficult decision to speak out against practices you consider to be wrong? Share with us how you stand up for what you believe in and how this has influenced your run for office. 1 minute, please.
Well, yeah, I'll be brief, I promise. I mentioned it before, there's no question. We review all police use of force and we work with the police every day. And when you have a bad use of force, like we totally believe Ray Tenzing had against Sam DuBose, I made the call. I said, he murdered Sam, okay, period. I mean, Sam had his issues, I get that, but you don't shoot somebody in the head for not having a front license plate. I thought was outrageous. The FOP was mad at me, but I'm gonna always do what I think is just. That's what I got elected to do. And if I can't get elected doing what I think is right, I don't want to be elected. And if it happens again, I do the same darn thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for your response. We're Mr. Joe Deters, current Hamilton County prosecutor. We're going to go to Mr. Fanon Rucker for a response to the question. Can you tell us about a time? I'm sorry, let me read the question. Tell us about a time in your career where you made a difficult decision to speak out against practices you considered to be wrong. Share with us how you plan to stand up for what you believe in, and how has this influenced your run for office?
Well, it's never been a difficult decision for me to stand up for what I saw was something wrong. In fact, as a civil rights lawyer, most of the cases that I took on was me yelling about something that I saw was wrong. My run for prosecutor in 2004 was standing up because I saw something wrong. As a judge, I would often step in and, not chastise, but address my colleagues on practices that I believe were unconstitutional or wrong. I can't tell you an instance, because every time during my professional career that I've seen it, I've either taken on a leadership role to address it, or I pointed it out to those and then publicly talked about it if it wasn't corrected. I believe in standing up for what I believe in, and I've never had a problem doing it. And as prosecutor, I'll do just the same thing.
Thank you so much for your response, Mr. Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office. Our last question of this evening actually comes from Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Their question, which I'm posing to everyone, and I'm going to start with our sheriffs, Charmaine, Mcguffey, let's start with you. How will, in our current COVID-19 situation, how would you handle nonviolent offenders to deal with or prevent an outbreak in the jails?
So with the current COVID situation, the first thing I would do is when anyone comes into that jail, the first thing is our officers will be masked because you lead by example. That's number one. I will be masked because I lead by example. We will sit those prisoners down and we will talk to them, because when you present them with the facts and give them the opportunity to protect themselves, many of them, most of them are going to comply. They're going to do those things because they want to stay healthy and they don't want to be sick. We are going to ask the prisoners to police themselves a little bit. And I've worked in that jail for many years, and I find out that when you give people responsibility for their own safety, regarding their health and that kind of thing, they take care of it because they want to be healthy. And we will do temperature checks and all of the things medically that we can do to show them and show our officers we care about your medical safety.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response, Ms. Charmaine Mcguffey, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Next, we'll have Bruce Hofbauer, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff, answer the question about COVID-19 outbreaks in prison. Well, in jail, jail, not prison.
Well, the first thing, and you talk about nonviolent offenders, one way to keep nonviolent offenders from going to jail is something that is used sometimes quite frequently, is a citation arrest. So if you receive a citation for a crime, that is an arrest. Some people don't believe that, but I think my prosecutor friends will admit that is an arrest. You cite them to court and you keep them from going into the Justice Center, and you cite them to a court date. That will provide them the opportunity of one less exposure at the jail. Then they go to court or they pay out a citation. It is an arrest. And then you provide your employees on the street and in the jail with all the proper PPEs, protective equipment, masks, everything that they need to do the job properly. There is a risk, but we want to minimize that risk. And then when we do come in contact with prisoners, and we provide them with all the proper materials to keep them safe, to keep the officers safe, and to keep everyone as safe in this COVID-19. So citation arrests,
Thank you,
would be the best.
Thank you so much, Bruce Hofbauer, candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Next, we will have Fanon Rucker answer the question regarding how to prevent a COVID-19 outbreak in the jails. Mr. Fanon Rucker, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, a lot of this has to do with some of the reforms that we talked about with bail bond reform. It's interesting, before COVID, about 70 to 75% of those in the Justice Center were there and had not yet been convicted of crimes. The judges, with Supreme Court guidance, and they actually took on the proposed reforms that we suggested and have been for 2 years in order to cite, as Bruce just mentioned, and also to discourage actually locking people up on low-level offenses. So what would I do? I would make sure that those are the reforms that are in place, not just because we're in a COVID emergency, but because that's the correct and more rational way that our court system should handle nonviolent offenses.
Thank you so much for your response, Mr. Fanon Rucker, candidate for Hamilton County Prosecutor. Next and last, we will have Mr. Joe Deters, current Hamilton County Prosecutor, answer the question about preventing a COVID-19 outbreak in jail.
Well, it's a difficult question, and as Fanon knows, we worked very hard with, and I think Charmaine knows this, and Bruce, that we worked very hard to make sure the Justice Center is cleared out with people that were either at risk or shouldn't be there in the first place. But I got to come back to this, if someone is in the Justice Center that doesn't deserve to be in the Justice Center, I would like to know about it, because I would be happy to get them out of the Justice Center. It's expensive, it's not productive, and I just like to get some names, and I just haven't heard any. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank each and every one of our candidates for joining and participating with us tonight. The League of Women Voters of Cincinnati area, we work to provide nonpartisan information to voters. So we do not support or endorse candidates, but rather we put together platforms like this for you all to share more about yourselves. So thank you guys for attending. Thank you everyone on Facebook for watching and participating in the chat. I will let everyone know that our annual voter guide will be available this year in the beginning of October in the first edition of City Beat, as well as at our office. Please follow our Facebook page at the League of Women Voters of Cincinnati to keep abreast on what's going on, and absolutely plan to register and plan to vote. We are encouraging people to vote safe, vote from home, vote by mail, participate. Like we always say, democracy is not a spectator sport, so get busy, get active, and encourage others to do so as well. Thank you all for attending, and good night.